Are you tired of being trash in PvP? Tired of driving your boxcar that gets easily one-shotted? Can't even build a good jet? Or don't know where to start building and playing crazy? Tanks. They're strong and hard to destroy. Best of all, they're easy to make. In this guide, I will teach you guys a simple way to build tanks, make it armored and deadly, giving it a cool look, and learn how to use it. And by the end of this video, not only you will have the knowledge of creating a deadly tank, but also give you a foundation on how to create other vehicles. Now there's gonna be a lot to cover in this guide. It's gonna involve some building and a little bit of putting the puzzle pieces together. Enough said, let's get started. Now before we start building the tank, I want to tell you a few things. Building a good tank is based on how many blocks can your computer handle. What I mean by this is if you have a device that can barely run Minecraft in low settings, then I suggest you build your tank around 500 to 800 blocks at best. Now just by looking at it, it looks like it might just get destroyed easily, but if you know how to play it, you'll become a nightmare on the battlefield. Now if you have a device where you can run the latest games, then you can build your tank much bigger and more durable. Now keep in mind that every time you get hit, pieces of your tank will fall off, and sometimes it might lag you. And you're gonna need a lot more engines to make it move effectively. So my best advice is sometimes the best tanks you can make are the ones you can use with no issues. This is a normal tank. Very easy to make, fun to drive around the map, and a lot of people build it and use it. Either used for public PvP for fun, or pro players using it to win tournaments. Whatever it is, it's a common tank to use in PvP. Alright, let's start building. Now get yourself an explosive block. Now you just want to block out 3 blocks and then remove the last 2. And then you want to keep doing this until you got 6 of these in your plot. Alright, so now get yourself a motor and you want to set the keybinds to S and W. Put speed at max and don't touch the torque, because the more torque you have on the motors, the more likely you will get flung, and this is important in PvP. Now you want this arrow to be up and then place the motors on the TNT. Alright, now for the other side, set your motor keybind to W and S. And basically these motors will let you go forwards and backwards. Alright, so now you click your screwdriver icon and then set the motor keybind to A and D. Now rotate the motor until the flat piece is facing towards you and start placing them down. Now these motors will let you go left and right. And now you want to find cylinders and find yourself a cylinder 2x2 and start placing them on the motors. Alright, so now you want to find compression. You find that by clicking this mechanical icon, and you want to find yourself a compression block. Now go to your settings and turn off Can Collide and turn on Transparent. This will let your compressed block go invisible. So now place these beside the TNT where the peg is facing back. Go to your settings again and set these to 0 and place another row where the peg is facing the front. Now get another fully locked compressed block and place them like this. Now place TNT blocks like this. And do it to the other side. Now go to cylinders again and find yourself a half cylinder 2x2 and then place them like this, and now you're done with the tracks. So the part we just built is supposed to help you cross the train tracks pretty easily. So now going back to our tracks, the reason why we want these compressors in between the wheels is so we can close the wheels much closer together. This is useful to cross rough terrain pretty easily and keep your tank short while having more wheels onto them. Now keep in mind, whatever I'm doing on screen, you don't have to copy everything I do. This is just a simple idea on how I am building this tank. Now you can go off with another completely different design, but whatever I'm showing you will almost still apply to what you're trying to make on your tank. Now with the track layout done, you notice that your suspension is not driving as good as you hoped. The reason being is because your wheels are made out of smooth plastic. The last time I checked, it doesn't grip onto things very well. To make our wheels work properly, we need to head over to materials. There's a lot of them, but you're only gonna need 3 different types: grass, fabric, and carbon fiber. Grass is basically the same thing as smooth plastic, and there's no grip to it, so you won't be stable when you're driving straight sometimes, especially in terrain. So unless you want to use it to drift around with your tank, then by all means, go for it. If not, you want to go look for another option. Now with fabric, you get a bit of slidiness and grip with your wheels, and it does pretty good on traveling through terrains, and everybody uses it. Carbon fiber. This is basically the roughest material you can ever use on your wheels. So if you're gonna use it, expect to do a lot of sharp turns with it. Now I encourage you guys to use all 3 materials because you get to customize on how your tank drives and feels. So it's really up to you. So now that you know the 3 materials that makes your tank drive better, what if you want to go faster? Well, it's very simple. You just need to put engines on your tank. Now for my example over here, you can place these engines along the line of compressors. Now, if this is too fast for you, just remove some of the engines you've placed. And if for some reason that's still too fast for you, you want to do something that's called downforcing, which basically means you have engines that's propelling downwards, so it keeps your build upright at all times. So you don't get to flip a lot, and you can actually use your tank in high speeds. Another reminder, because downforcing is basically having another engine propelling down, you're also slowing down your tank. But the benefit of this, you also make your tank a lot more agile. But don't put too much downforce because you're gonna have some annoying problems. Keep this part in mind because this is very important when you use your tank later. Now, as I said with downforcing, if it's slowing everything a bit too much, you can just put more engines into it, especially your turning. So now you're finished with your tracks. Let's move on to the body. Now to build the body of your tank, get a compressor and place 3 of them like this. Now the next step is to measure the whole body itself. Now the maximum length of your tank should only be around 21 blocks. As for how wide you need your tank to be, you need to keep in mind that the wider your tank, the more protection you have. The shortest you can go is around 7 to 8 blocks. The maximum that you should only go for is around 11 to 12 blocks. Anything wider will lead you to place more blocks, which will result to more lag and lower frames, and you don't want that. Now, before we make the body itself, let's make the locking tower a bit more taller. And now we're gonna get into the most important part of the video, armor. And there are 3 main types. TNT. TNT is known for one good thing: invincible to almost anything. Rockets, fireworks, cutters, and guns will not destroy TNT. The only thing will destroy TNT is TNT itself and lava spitters. Now, even though TNT is almost indestructible, the armor will not block guns and rockets. The only thing this armor will block is fireworks and cutters. How fireworks work is that they explode on any blocks, and because TNT never gets destroyed by fireworks, they're great armor against them. Though just keep in mind that fireworks, if accelerated, will go through any block, especially TNT. As for cutters, well, they can't cut them. 1x7 beams. Now this block will defend against rockets and fireworks. Best of all, they won't be destroyed. Unfortunately though, guns will destroy them very easily, so keep that in mind. Paint blocks. This armor is basically good for only one thing: blocking gunfire. Because depending on where you shoot paint blocks, there are 3 blocks you need to get through to fully penetrate it. 1 plate from the front, 1 block from the middle, and 1 plate from the very back. As for rockets and fireworks, let's say that it won't last very long. Because this block basically has about 17 blocks in 1 block, your PC might not react very well with paint blocks exploding. So my best recommendation for using this armor, don't spam too much of it. Only place it in areas where you're gonna need it the most. Now these are the 3 main armor I recommend you guys using for your tank. But anything can be used as armor, you just need to figure out how to make them work. It's time to make the body. Now when you're making the body, just keep in mind that the main weapon other enemy tanks will be using against you are fireworks. As for flying vehicles, they will mainly use rockets. But also don't forget to armor your tank against guns though. It's also good to layer up another set of armor in your body for more protection. And also don't make your armor slab too long because you're also building another important piece for your body. Side note, if you want to give your wheels a little bit more room, find this compressor block, it's basically beside your slab armor, and increase the offset. The next thing we need to build is a lower and frontal plate. I mean, really it's simple, we could just make it flat, but that doesn't really look good. Now we could do this a bit more easier, and we could just place triangle wedges, and there you go, we got a frontal plate. One big problem though, guns easily destroy it, and that's not good because we could have used some of that protection. So we have to make our own. For starters, if your armor slab overextends the back of the tracks, remove some until they're all lined up. Now to start building the frontal plate, let's first build the lower plate. Pretty easy, just some blocks and triangles. Now place another row of triangles on top of them like this. Now on the very front of the armor slab, place a row of stairs. This will form the frontal plate very easily. Now go to your compressor tower and build a TNT line like this until you reach the stairs below. And it has to be TNT, and then place an angle block. Then place a 1x7 beam on top of the angle block and block out, because you need to figure out on where this slab and this triangle fit together. Now change the angle of your angle block until the slab and the triangle meet together. And if the slab part is sticking out too much, you want to cut it down to a half block and see if it lines up. And if you do everything correctly, you should have the slab and the triangle part make a clean frontal plate. Now you notice that there's this part that's sticking out and you don't like that. Well, it's going to be a bit harder to make it a bit more cleaner, but remove some TNT and put one compressor block where the peg is facing the front and another one that's facing down. And you want to use these two to fix the piece that was sticking out. Now keep in mind you have to change the angle of the frontal plate to make this happen. And if you've done everything correctly, you should have a cleaner frontal plate. Now you can replace these 1x7 beams if you want with other armor types. And now you have a frontal plate that won't break easily. Now finish the back of the tank like this. And basically, now your tank's body is done. Now if you want to add more protection to it, add side skirts. If you're going to add one, make sure that the side skirts have multiple weld points, so in case if anybody fires on it, it won't break by one good shot. The body of the tank is done. By this point, you should be making your tank out of compressors and angle blocks, because 1, they're much easier to build with, and 2, because they replaced every known locking technique that I've talked about on the first video, except for 1. But keep in mind that compressors are much more laggier than ordinary motor lock. Now let's build the last part of what a tank needs, a turret. To start building the turret, you just need to make your locking tower long enough and then place a motor 2 on the very top of the locking tower. As for your motor 2 settings, don't set your max torque too high unless you want it to glitch a lot. Now beside your motor 2, there is a compressor where you can lift your turret up to give more space for it to turn. Now you are ready to start building your turret. Now let's start creating the foundation of your turret. This foundation will let you create a locking tower very easily. Now as for the measurements for your turret, you should only make your turret's length half of the size of the body. And as for how wide you want your turret to be, don't make it wider than your tank's body. You can, basically, if you want, but it's just gonna look a little bit ugly. And as for your turret's height, just don't make it taller than your tank's body. Just like armoring the tank's body, you have to do the same thing to your turret. You have to armor it in a way to protect 3 important parts. Your motor 2s, responsible for turning your whole turret, your weapons, which we will talk about on the next chapter, and your compressor tower. So whatever you put on the compressor tower of your turret, it is important that you didn't put any armor blocks or anything that you will use in battle. So whatever you're going to place on your compressor towers is either gonna be decorations for your tank's turret or spaced armor to make your tank look cooler. So to have the best turret for your own tank, just make it simple. Add a little bit of triangles and some curves into there, and there you go. You have yourself a good simple turret. Now what if you want to make your tank a little bit cooler? So to start making your own angles for a turret, you need to place down a system for your compressors and angle blocks where you can tweak them to go sideways, forwards and backwards, up and down for your compressors. And as for your angle blocks, you want them to rotate, go up and down, or sideways, all in one line, or in a small area. Now if you're only planning to rotate it, then you won't be needing a lot of compressors and angle blocks. So now once you've set up the system and a piece to rotate, first set your rotation on your angle block. Once you've set the rotation, you can go about this in 2 ways. If you're trying to connect it to something, you want to use the compressors to move it around until you finally connected it to the other piece. Now keep this in mind, this is gonna be the most tedious part when it comes to making your own angles. Now if you're trying to make another custom angle, very simple, you just need to build off to the side on the same level as your first angle. If you don't have enough space to the side, you can build the system on the next level of your locking tower. It is a good rule of thumb to keep a 1 block air gap under any block below you. This will let you have a lot more space to work on your locking tower. Now you don't have to follow this rule if your second angle that you're making is not blocking or attached to the first angle. Now if you're finished on making the angles for your turret, you see that the front has a massive gap on the front of the turret. To fix this, you just need to copy the pieces you've made for your angles and build this piece on the middle. Then get a compressor to extend this part until you connect it in between the angles. But if there's a small gap left in this turret, then you might need to copy another piece and then you need to push them to the middle to create a skinnier shape to fit the gaps. Now what sucks is that depending on the turret shape you made, there's gonna be some parts of the angle that'll be sticking out on the front. The simple way to fix it is just to move this front piece a little bit forward. So once you've understood on how to make angles like this, then you pretty much can create any custom angle for your turret. Now a bit of a warning, you don't want to finish your turret fully because you need one more important piece to make your turret fully functional as a tank. But we'll get into that later. And as for now, you should create some holes on top of your turret. Now before we go ahead and get to the next step on finishing our tank, I want to point out some things about the normal tank. Now don't get me wrong, it is pretty fun to drive, but you're kinda slow at the same time. Sure, you can put more engines, but you also need to downforce it so you don't lose control. And depending on how many engines you have on your tank, it might make your tank very laggy. Now you're gonna need that speed to get away from something or destroy a very fast target. And obviously, you can't drive on water. Well, you can float and be an amphibious tank, but if a boat or a plane catches you driving these waters, well, you're basically getting hit right on the dome. But there's a way to fix all these problems that you deal with on your normal tank. You just need to build another type of tank, and this tank is very rare to find out in the wild, and not a lot of people know how to build it, especially use it properly. But this tank works entirely differently than your normal tank. But don't worry, it's very easy to make, and you sci-fi nerds may love it. Hover tanks. These tanks can travel much faster than your normal tank, and because they don't contact the ground, they can go faster without needing a lot of engines. Now, as you know, for a normal tank to change directions, it needs to turn its whole body to do so. Well, for a hover tank, you only need to press one button to do the job very instantly. Because of this, you always keep your frontal armor to the enemy at all times. And the greatest thing that this tank can do is drive on water, allowing you to fight anywhere on the map with slightly no issues. Now, because you levitate, stray TNT in exploding box cars will be no issue to you, considering that you can just hover over them. Now that you know what a hover tank can do, it's time to build one. And of course, we need a suspension for it. And now there's two different ways we can build this suspension. The first one is very simple. The other one is a bit harder, but you get a lot more speed with less engines. But for the sake of simplicity, let's build this one first. Alright, start placing 12 TNT blocks on the line. Now you want to get yourself a hover thruster. You can find it on the propeller icon. Now you want to set these key buttons to whatever you're comfortable with, because this will let you decide on how high your hover tank should hover. Now place these hover thrusters on a straight line and skip 2 blocks, and then place another row until you get to the very end. Now you want to get yourself a jet engine, set them all to W and on and off only mode. Place them in between the back of the hover thrusters. Now you want to go to your settings again and set your keybind to S only. Go to your settings once again, you're going to do this a lot, and set your keybind to Q. Now this time you want to set it to E. Settings once again, set them to A. Now set it to D. Now these engines will allow you to turn on your hover tank. Now you want to go to compressions and get an angle block and set the angle to 50. Now you want to place all these at the ends of the hover thrusters with the peg rotating downwards. Now get the hover thrusters with the same settings. Now place them on the angle block peg. As for the very front part of the suspension, you need to change the keybinds. This part will allow you to change any imbalances on your hover tank. And as for the side parts we put, you're wondering why we put another set of hover thrusters there. Because it's there to help you when driving around rough terrain, when turning, or driving sideways. Now let's go over the movements on how you can drive your hover tank. Of course, you can go forwards and backwards, and you can turn. But there's one more thing that this suspension can do. If you press Q and E, then you're able to go left and right without turning. Now this is actually good because you don't have to expose your side when turning, when changing directions. So you always get to keep your frontal armor at all times to the opponent. Now once you got the suspension done, now make a compressor tower on the TNT beam. And from here, you can just build this tank on how you would normally build it on a normal tank. Now let's learn on how to build the other suspension. To start off, get yourself a TNT, and then you want to block out 14 blocks on a line. And then you want to place 2 more TNTs on each side at the very front. Now go to your motor settings. Set the keybinds to S and W. Max out the speed, keep the max torque, turn on servo, set your max angle to 20, and your tolerance to 20. Now for some of you guys, you're wondering what tolerance does to your motors. Well, it basically makes your motors turn faster in a way. Now you want to place these motor 2s where the green arrow is facing forward towards the TNT. Then you want to skip 2 blocks and then place another one. Do this until you get to the very end. For the other side, change the keybinds to W and S. Now don't forget to put 2 more TNTs on each side. Get yourself a compressor block and you want to set the distance to -0.075. Now place an angle block where the peg rotates to the compressor, shown on this yellow marker. Now get a compressor and you want to set the distance to -0.25. Now get yourself a motor 2 and change the keybinds to Q and E. Also change the max angle. Make sure that the yellow part of the motor 2 is facing up towards the compressor. Get another angle block and you want the yellow part rotating to the motor 2. And then get another compressor, set the distance to -0.35. Now get yourself a hover thruster, same settings as the last suspension we did, and might as well turn on wider detection. Now what this basically does, it detects the surface by 1 degree. And there you go. Now you can test around the motorized hover suspension. And now you want to do this all over again to the rest of the motor 2s. Now if you want to test out the suspension, lower the drag on all of the hover thrusters on your suspension. Just don't make them too low or else the suspension will start to shake. Now how it works is by tilting the hover thrusters on an angle, you push the vehicle off that direction. And the more you tilt it, the faster it goes. And the suspension will make you go faster over time. If you want to limit the speed, just place wing panels on the suspension. So to finish off the suspension, add some small propellers to help you turn, and add more engines that helps you go left and right and forwards and backwards. Now keep in mind, you want to move these pieces by 1 block so the motor suspension has space to turn. And don't forget to add this part on your hover suspension. Like I said, it will fix the imbalances on your hover tank. Now one more thing, make sure that the parts do not block the motorized suspension from turning fully. Now once you've built the whole suspension, you can basically build this how you would normally build it on a normal tank. And the good thing is, it's much shorter than your normal tank, so it's gonna be harder for the enemy to hit you. But you gotta keep this one issue in mind, that in a hover tank, weight absolutely means everything. In short, how many blocks you've put on the tank. This matters because it changes on how well your hover tank can move. And if it's too heavy, driving this on terrain is going to be a nightmare because you will crash into every small bump you drive on. Now there's a simple fix if this happens, and you just gotta place wing panels on your hover tank. But this also makes your hover tank much slower because of the drag, so you have to put more engines to keep the speed. But if you do this too much, then your hover tank will eventually be too laggy to play. To give you a heads up when making the hover tank move the way you need it to, acceleration is gonna be one of the biggest issues. Because you're hovering, air has no friction. So it's going to be much harder for you to change directions very quickly. And you're going to need this to dodge things in time. So this is the part where I teach you guys on what engines to use to make your hover tank move effectively. Super rocket engines is going to be the best way to gain speed. Jet engines and small propellers will help you increase your hover tank's acceleration. Now keep in mind though that super rocket engines is the lightest out of the 3 and jet engines are the heaviest. So if you want to go lighter, then might as well go for the small propellers, since they'll do a good job of giving you a lot of acceleration. However, for the jet engines, even though it's very heavy, gives you more speed and acceleration at the same time. Another tip, if you're making your hover tank go sideways and it tilts, your engine placement is not centered, or there's too much propulsion on one side. To know which one is unbalanced, if your hover tank is tilting to the side from the back, then your side engines are off-centered in the back. Either remove some of the engines or move them all to the center until your hover tank stops tilting. Same goes if your hover tank is tilting on the front. To figure out on how heavy each blocks are, so you know which blocks to use to make your hover tank lighter, then you want to make a scale. Very easy, just place an anchor block, a hinge, and a 1x7 beam. From here, you can compare and test which blocks are heavier from the other. So now that we've covered both tanks to use in battle, let's go over their strengths and weaknesses. In the next episode, I will teach you guys how to arm your tanks, how they work, and how to make them better. If you made it this far into the video, be sure to check the description or my comments because I'll answer some of your questions. Also, don't forget to join the Discord server. You have to be 13 to do so, or older, if you need more help on the basics or use your new tanks against one another. Until I release this second episode, might as well go watch this video. It's pretty cool.